A battered shepherd collapsed on Meredith Sloane's porch, but in a town that gossips faster than it helps, she slammed the door, unaware her choice would unravel a secret buried beneath Cedarbrook's sunny streets. When the desperate cries of that dirty dog echoed through the night, Meredith faced a decision that would pit her against neighbors, police, and even her past. What did she turn away from? And why would the truth break her heart? Where are you watching from today? Drop your city below and don't look away. The ending to this story will stay with you long after the credits roll. The rain had only just let up over Cedar Brook, leaving the lawns slick and the sidewalks streaked with muddy tracks from passing cars. Meredith Sloane, her silver hair tucked under a faded baseball cap, stood in the warm yellow glow spilling from her front door, her gaze fixed on the figure curled at the edge of her porch. At first, she thought it might have been a pile of wind-blown leaves caught against the welcome mat, but the subtle shiver running through the matted, tawny fur told a different story. A German shepherd, filthy and gaunt, his coat marred by patches of dried blood and mud. For a moment, Meredith gripped the doorframe, torn between habit and compassion. Since Henry's passing 3 years earlier, she had learned to trust the walls of her quiet home, to let the world pass by on the other side of her flower beds and painted fence. Strays had appeared before, a raccoon in the trash, a hungry cat scratching at the screen door, but never a dog, and certainly never one that looked as if it had dragged itself from the jaws of something much crueler than the wild. She cleared her throat, voice wavering with uncertainty. "Go on now," she called out, waving a trembling hand. "There's nothing for you here." But the dog didn't move. He only lifted his head, ears drooping, and fixed her with eyes the color of worn amber, eyes that shimmered with a quiet plea and something deeper, a wounded dignity Meredith hadn't expected. From the neighboring house, Mrs. Avery's blinds rattled, her silhouette pressed against the glass. Meredith could practically hear the hushed gossip starting, the way rumors bloomed in small towns like wildflowers after a rain. "I told you, Sloane," Mrs. Avery's voice carried, brittle with judgment. "You let strays linger, you'll have a pack before winter." Farther down the block, another neighbor paused his evening walk to shake his head, casting a look that mingled pity and annoyance. Meredith's heart pounded with a confusion of shame and defensiveness. She worried about disease, about fleas or worse. She'd seen what a sick animal could do to a house, the way trouble sometimes slipped in when you opened your heart, even for a second. Still, the shepherd didn't bark or whimper. He didn't inch closer. He simply lay there, each breath shallow, watching her as if measuring her soul with every rise and fall of his ragged chest. Biting back an urge she didn't quite understand, Meredith stepped out, shooing him again, sterner this time. "Go, I mean it. Go home, wherever that is." Her voice cracked, part command, part prayer. The shepherd's eyes never left hers. She saw a flicker of pain. Not physical, but the deeper kind, the kind that follows betrayal or loss. Something in her chest tightened, but pride, or was it fear, won out. She closed the door, twisting the lock until it clicked, shutting out both the night and the unspoken plea lingering in those eyes. Inside, Meredith leaned against the wall, hands shaking, pulse racing from more than just the chill. From the kitchen window, she glimpsed the dog unmoving, a forlorn statue against the spreading puddles. She wished she could explain herself to him, or the gathering eyes of Cedar Brook, but words failed her. Instead, she settled for the illusion of safety, closing blinds and turning off lights one by one. Yet as midnight swept over the silent suburb, a long, mournful howl rose from the porch, a sound threaded with sorrow and loneliness. It slipped through the cracks in the window, curling around Meredith's heart in a way no rumor or warning ever could. That night, as she tried to sleep, Meredith heard a haunting howl drifting through the darkness just beyond her window. Meredith tried to ignore the world outside her drawn curtains, willing herself to fall asleep as the familiar shadows of her living room shifted and swayed in the blue glow from the street lamp. She had tucked herself under an old quilt in her favorite chair, the same one Henry used to claim after dinner, a book propped on his knees, and the TV humming quietly in the background. Tonight, though, even the comfort of routine felt fragile, as if the simple presence of that battered shepherd had thrown her whole life askew. But the night was not quiet. Every so often, as the clock crept toward midnight, the dog's howl cut through the stillness, long and raw and lonesome, an ache that seemed to reach inside Meredith and squeeze her heart. She tried stuffing cotton balls in her ears, burying her face in a pillow, even humming old hymns under her breath. Nothing worked. The dog would pause, only to start again, each cry somehow more desperate than the last, echoing against the siding of her home. It wasn't just her who noticed. The neighborhood had always prided itself on its silence, on the way you could leave your windows open in summer and still hear the crickets and the distant rush of the interstate. Now that peace was broken, and there was a sense of eyes watching, whispers growing in the dark. Her phone rang, sharply, insistently, a jarring sound in the quiet. She flinched before picking up, glancing at the caller ID. Keith Benson, her neighbor from across the street. Meredith hesitated, then pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" Keith's voice, always tinged with a kind of gruff authority, came through immediately. "Meredith, sorry to call so late, but is there something going on with that dog on your porch? My wife can't sleep. The howling's been going on for over an hour. It's keeping the whole block up." Meredith bristled, suddenly aware of the thin walls and the unseen web of expectations that threaded through their community. "It's not my dog, Keith," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "It just showed up tonight. I told it to go away, but it won't listen." On the other end, she could hear muffled voices. Keith's wife, Linda, no doubt. Before he returned, sharper now. "Well, it's got to go somewhere. It's bleeding all over your porch, and I swear, if this keeps up, I'm calling animal control. The Hendersons next door are already talking about it." The accusation stung. As if it were her fault the animal had chosen her door. Meredith pressed a hand to her chest, fingers trembling. "I'll handle it," she promised, though she didn't know how. After hanging up, she stood at her living room window, careful to pull aside the curtain just an inch, heart pounding with dread, and an emotion she didn't want to name. Outside, the dog was still there, its head now pressed against her door. Meredith watched as he lifted a battered paw and scratched, slow and persistent, leaving streaks of dark red across the chipped paint. Each mark was a silent accusation, a plea scrawled in blood that cut through all her defenses. She could see the dog's entire body shake with the effort, muscles twitching beneath fur matted with rain and filth. He was trying to hold himself upright, but every few seconds, his legs wobbled and he sagged, only to force himself up again, determined not to give in to whatever pain haunted him. The porch light glinted off his eyes, pools of gold in the shadows, wide and pleading. It was a look Meredith recognized, one she'd seen years ago in Henry's face, the day the doctor told them about the diagnosis. The fear and hope mingled in silent desperation. For a fleeting moment, Meredith felt a surge of anger, not at the dog, but at the world for placing this burden on her shoulders, for demanding she choose between her comfort and the suffering of a creature who had no one else to turn to. The house felt too small, the air thick with unspoken judgment, and she resented her neighbors for making her the villain in their quiet drama. Her mind spun through options. Call animal control herself and let them take the dog away. Ignore the situation and hope it resolved itself by morning. Or, the most dangerous of all, do something about it. She didn't want fleas or worse, rabies, perhaps, anywhere near her home. And yet, the thought of those wounded eyes, the dog's unwavering insistence on her doorstep, made it impossible to turn away. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from Keith. "If you can't deal with it, I'll do it myself. My kids need to sleep." She stared at the message, her jaw tightening. She wasn't a cruel person, despite what the neighborhood might soon believe. She remembered the way Henry used to kneel in the grass for hours, feeding the stray cats at the park, never mind what the neighbors thought. That memory, sharp and unexpected, pulled something loose inside her. Moving quietly, Meredith slipped into the kitchen. She opened the bread box, found the last slice of sandwich loaf, and poured a glass of water. The movements were automatic, her body acting before her mind could catch up. She wrapped the bread in a napkin, fingers clumsy, and hesitated at the back door. For a moment, she considered putting on shoes or even a jacket, but the urgency in the dog's cries pushed her forward. As she stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air bit at her skin, and the world seemed to shrink to the battered shepherd and the splintered wood beneath his paws. He didn't growl or bark, only whimpered, backing away as she approached, his tail tucked so tightly between his legs it nearly disappeared. Meredith knelt, placing the water and bread on the step, her heart hammering. "Here," she whispered, the word almost lost in the wind. "It's not much, but it's all I have." The dog looked at her, eyes wide with a blend of hope and caution, before inching forward. He sniffed the bread, then lapped at the water with a kind of frantic desperation. Meredith felt her defenses begin to crumble. She could not watch suffering. Not like this, not right at her door. She glanced up, certain she saw the flicker of a curtain across the street. Neighbors watching, ready to pass judgment on whatever she did next. But for now, it was only her and the shepherd, alone in the half-light, bound together by circumstance and an ache that neither of them could quite name. Reluctantly, Meredith gathered a glass of water and a crust of bread, then stepped outside to face the bleeding shepherd. The dawn broke gray and uneasy over Cedar Brook, pulling Meredith from a shallow, dreamless sleep. For a few seconds, she lay in bed, the quilt heavy on her chest, trying to convince herself that last night's events had been nothing more than a strange figment of her loneliness. But as soon as she sat up, she heard it again, the soft, insistent scratching at the front door, punctuated by a guttural whimper that pulled her straight into the present. With a resigned sigh, Meredith pulled on her cardigan and shuffled down the hallway. The house was colder than she remembered, or perhaps it was just the nerves that made her skin prickle. When she opened the door, she found the shepherd curled tight against the threshold, eyes heavy with fatigue, but burning with something raw, a determination that refused to fade. "All right, you," she muttered, voice softer than she intended. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." She stepped outside, hugging her arms to her chest as the morning air bit into her. The dog sat up immediately, tail thumping once against the wood, then lurched to his feet and limped to her side. Meredith watched him, uncertain whether to be flattered or afraid. His injuries looked worse in daylight, a patchwork of scabbed-over wounds, swollen paw pads, and dirt tangled in his coat. Still, there was a strange dignity about him, a refusal to surrender that felt almost human. She hesitated, weighing her next move, when the shepherd surprised her, nosing insistently at her wrist, then gently catching the cuff of her sweater between his teeth. Meredith stiffened, but the dog's touch was impossibly careful. He tugged, not with force, but with the desperate urgency of someone trying to communicate across an unbridgeable gap. "What do you want?" she whispered, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. The dog only pulled harder, fixing her with those gold-flecked eyes. Against her better judgment, Meredith let herself be led, the animal guiding her along the edge of the porch, then down the worn path toward the backyard. Each step felt surreal. She half expected to wake at any moment, Henry's gentle snore echoing from their bedroom, this whole ordeal nothing but a ghost story conjured from too many lonely nights. They rounded the corner just as the familiar rumble of the mail truck echoed down the street. Meredith barely noticed until the shepherd stopped suddenly, ears pricking forward, his body tense. The mail carrier, a wiry young man named Eric with a penchant for local gossip, was halfway up the walkway, arms full of envelopes, when he caught sight of the shepherd's teeth on Meredith's sleeve. "Oh my God!" Eric shrieked, nearly dropping his bundle. Hey, are you all right? Is it biting you?" The commotion shattered the early morning calm. Meredith jerked her arm free, stepping instinctively between Eric and the dog. But it was too late. Eric had already pulled out his phone, snapping a blurry photo as he backed away, his voice rising in panic. "Stay back! That thing's attacking her! I'm calling animal control!" Meredith's cheeks flamed with embarrassment, humiliation swirling in her gut. She opened her mouth to explain, to defend the shepherd, but Eric was already halfway down the walk, tapping furiously at his phone, no doubt composing a dramatic account for his followers on the Cedar Brook Community Watch group. Within minutes, the street was alive with curiosity. A curtain twitched across the street. The sound of a door creaked open 2 houses down. Meredith felt the pressure of a dozen unseen eyes, their judgments as sharp as any wound. She could practically hear the digital chorus building. Widow Sloane attacked by stray. And she knew how quickly stories, especially in a town like Cedar Brook, could spiral out of control. But the shepherd seemed oblivious to the uproar. He gave a low, impatient bark, then turned back toward the yard, tugging once more at Meredith's sleeve before letting go and padding ahead, driven by something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, defiance, maybe just the need to reclaim some small measure of agency. Meredith followed, brushing past the overgrown shrubs that lined the back fence. The air back here felt heavier, colder, as if something hung suspended between the morning sun and the shadowed grass. The shepherd moved with purpose now, limping toward a rickety wooden gate that separated her property from the narrow alley behind. As he neared the fence, his demeanor changed. Ears back, hackles raised, a deep growl vibrating through his chest. Meredith froze, every instinct telling her to turn away, but the dog's urgency was contagious. She took a cautious step closer, peering over the gate into the tangled brush of the alleyway. Suddenly, the shepherd erupted into frantic barking, his entire body pressed against the fence, claws scrabbling for purchase. The sound was not the forlorn howl of the night before, but something sharp and commanding. A warning, a demand. For a brief moment, Meredith imagined he was trying to draw her attention to something hidden, something that needed to be found. At that exact moment, another voice pierced the morning. The distinctive ping of an incoming text. She glanced at her phone. Sure enough, Eric's post was already spreading. "Dog attack on Willow Lane. Be careful. Elderly woman nearly mauled." Replies were coming in fast, some mocking, others frightened, a few urging animal control to take care of it before something worse happens. Meredith felt a wave of frustration, her sense of isolation deepening. No one had asked what was happening. No one cared that she was, in truth, perfectly safe. She glanced back at the shepherd, whose gaze was fixed, unwavering, on a shadowed corner of the alley. The dog's bark grew louder, more insistent, as if he knew there was something beyond the fence that demanded attention. She tried to see what he saw, squinting into the gloom, but nothing moved, just a tangle of weeds, a broken piece of fence, and the thick silence of a neighborhood too eager to believe the worst. And yet, standing there in the chill of early morning, Meredith could not shake the feeling that the shepherd was trying to tell her something, to lead her somewhere she was meant to go. Meredith began to sense that something was very wrong. The early morning quiet had been shattered, not only by the agitated barking of the shepherd, but also by the whispering suspicion that now followed Meredith like a shadow. Her nerves, already frayed by a sleepless night and the relentless scrutiny of her neighbors, were raw and humming with anxiety as she stood just inside her backyard, peering into the overgrown tangle behind the fence. The shepherd, breath heavy and urgent, continued to claw and whine at a spot just below the lowest slat, his every motion radiating intent. "Calm down," Meredith pleaded, her own hands trembling as she reached for the latch. The cold metal bit into her skin, grounding her in the moment. The gate protested with a shrill creak as she forced it open, the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves mingling in the chilly air. The dog darted through first, nose pressed low to the ground, fur bristling with single-minded determination. Meredith hesitated. Every rational part of her screamed to go back inside, to retreat from the chaos that seemed to be blooming around her. But something in the shepherd's behavior made her push forward, heart pounding. He led her straight to a dense patch of wild shrubs, overgrown and knotted with thorny brambles. He stopped abruptly, sniffing furiously, then began digging with both paws, flinging dirt and leaves in a desperate frenzy. She stooped beside him, trying to see what had captured his attention. And then, half buried in the black, damp soil, she saw it. A tiny sneaker, pale pink and impossibly small, the toe smeared dark with something that sent a chill rippling through her veins. Meredith gasped, stumbling backward as the shepherd looked up at her, his eyes searching her face, as if urging her to understand. At that moment, the sound of footsteps pounded down the side yard. Meredith looked up, startled, to see a young man in a crisp blue uniform, Officer Eric Malloy, Cedarbrook's newest patrolman, still so fresh-faced that the badge on his chest seemed almost too big for him. He'd been called in response to the morning's commotion, and his hand hovered uncertainly near his holstered radio as he took in the scene. "Ma'am, step away from the dog," Eric barked, voice high with nerves. "Are you all right? Did it attack you?" Meredith, breathless and overwhelmed, could only shake her head. "No, he found something." She gestured weakly to the dirt at her feet. Eric's gaze snapped downward, then widened in horror as he saw the small shoe. Crouching, he examined it carefully, using the tip of his pen to avoid disturbing the scene further. The shepherd sat back on his haunches, watching every move, as if waiting for some verdict only he could understand. "It's a child's shoe," Eric murmured, almost to himself. "Wait, there's something—" He lifted it gingerly, revealing a patch of embroidery on the strap, the name stitched in bright, careful letters. Aubrey. For a long moment, silence stretched taut between them. Meredith felt the world tilt beneath her feet, the name echoing with dreadful familiarity. Aubrey. She'd seen the posters plastered on telephone poles and taped to the grocery store window. Missing. Aubrey Jensen, age 6. Last seen 2 days ago. Please call with any information. Eric straightened, his posture suddenly rigid, eyes suspicious. You know this name, ma'am? Meredith nodded shakily, her voice barely more than a whisper. Everyone in town does. That's the little girl who disappeared. Eric's suspicion flickered into something harder. He radioed for backup, words clipped and professional. Unit 4, this is Malloy. I've got a possible lead on the Jensen case. Request immediate support at Willow Lane. Backyard. Possible evidence recovered. He turned back to Meredith, gaze wary. I need you to stay right here, ma'am. Don't touch anything. And keep that dog under control. The shepherd bristled, sensing the tension, but didn't move from Meredith's side. If anything, he pressed closer, his body angled protectively between her and the young officer. The gesture, so loyal, so automatic, should have been comforting, but in this moment only added fuel to the storm gathering above them. Within minutes, the sound of sirens sliced through the quiet, growing louder as more units descended on the sleepy street. Neighbors emerged onto porches and driveways, drawn by the spectacle, their eyes full of thinly veiled curiosity and fear. Eric kept Meredith at a distance, fielding questions from his colleagues as they strung yellow tape around the yard, photographing the scene and collecting the shoe as evidence. No one seemed interested in Meredith's version of events. Their attention was fixed on the dog, on his matted fur and bloodied paws, on the way he remained glued to her side, despite the chaos. Words floated in the air. Dangerous, stray, possible attack. Evidence. But none of them matched what Meredith had witnessed. The shepherd was not a threat. He was a guide, a messenger, and perhaps the only soul willing to see beyond appearances. Still, the eyes of suspicion turned her way, and she could feel the narrative shifting. Was it possible, they seemed to wonder, that the strange widow and the filthy dog had something to do with the little girl's disappearance? The idea was as absurd as it was horrifying, but Meredith saw the way people recoiled, whispering behind their hands, their imaginations fueled by fear and social media. Eric, for all his inexperience, followed protocol with the intensity of someone desperate to do things right. He took her statement twice, asking the same questions in different ways, and all the while, Meredith struggled to keep her composure. The shepherd never left her side. Eyes fixed on every movement of the officers, muscles tensed as if ready to leap between Meredith and the world, if need be. As the crowd swelled and the whispers grew darker, Meredith began to realize the full weight of what had been uncovered. This was not just about a lost dog or a lonely widow. It was about the unraveling of certainty in a town that had always prided itself on safety and neighborly trust. And as the yellow tape fluttered in the morning breeze, Meredith knew that nothing about her life, or the shepherd's, would ever be the same. Police began searching the area around Meredith's home. The sterile chill of the Cedar Brook police station was a world away from the wild uncertainty of Meredith's backyard. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting hard shadows on the cracked linoleum floor and amplifying the sense of disorientation that pressed in on her from every side. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial-strength cleaning agents, a faint metallic tang underneath it all. Meredith sat on a plastic chair, her hands twisted in her lap, and tried not to look at the steel door behind which the shepherd had disappeared. Officer Eric Malloy hovered nearby, his jaw tight with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. He'd shepherded her gently but firmly into the station, offering her a bottle of water and a place to sit, but since then, he'd spoken mostly in short, apologetic sentences, always glancing toward the glass-walled office at the end of the corridor. That office, with its cluttered desk and a faded American flag, belonged to Chief Dwayne Prescott, a broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a stare that could slice through granite. He now stood over the paperwork Meredith had just signed, one hand resting on the file as he reviewed its contents. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and measured, but laced with judgment that needed no further elaboration. Mrs. Sloan, you say this dog just appeared at your door. Injured, unclaimed. And yet, in less than 24 hours, you're at the center of an ongoing investigation. Dwayne fixed her with a look that seemed to pin her in place. You realize, Making friends with stray animals comes with consequences. Sometimes terrible ones. There are reasons why people in this town keep their doors closed. Meredith's face flushed with indignation, though her voice trembled as she replied, "I didn't ask for any of this, Chief Prescott. I was just—" He cut her off with a flick of his wrist. "Intentions mean little, Mrs. Sloane. Results are what matter." He closed the file with a decisive snap. "For now, you're not under arrest, but we expect you to remain available for further questioning. You understand what's at stake here." The words stung, heavy with unspoken accusation. Meredith tried to steady herself, wishing she could reach out to the shepherd, to explain, to apologize for the world's suspicion that had somehow engulfed them both. But through the small, wired window in the hallway, she could see the animal's outline. Ears pinned back, pacing the narrow confines of an impersonal kennel. The sound of his claws clicking on the linoleum set Meredith's nerves on edge. It was a rhythm of worry she could not quiet. As she waited, Eric approached quietly, his expression softening as he glanced around to make sure Prescott was out of earshot. "Mrs. Sloane," he said in a low voice, "I know how this looks. The chief, he's got to follow procedure. But—" Eric leaned in, a rare glimmer of defiance in his gaze. "That dog of yours, I don't think he's dangerous. I think he's trying to tell us something. He led you right to that shoe. He's not like the other strays we see around here." Meredith met Eric's eyes, searching for reassurance, and for a moment the noise and judgment of the station faded into the background. "Do you think so?" she whispered. "Everyone seems to think the worst." Eric nodded. "Sometimes people are too quick to judge, especially when fear gets involved. But I'll keep an eye on him. I promise. We're not done yet." Before Meredith could reply, the heavy tread of boots signaled Prescott's return. He motioned her toward the interview room again, glancing over at Eric with a look that brooked no argument. "Officer Malloy, I'll handle things from here." Eric's jaw tightened, but he backed away, leaving Meredith feeling exposed and suddenly very small. Inside the cramped interview room, the fluorescent lights seemed even harsher. Prescott leafed through a thin stack of reports, occasionally glancing up to assess her with the same clinical detachment he'd reserved for an errant teenager or a petty thief. "Let me be clear, Mrs. Sloane. You're not being charged with anything. Yet. But people in this town remember things. They talk. You've lived here a long time. But how well do you know your neighbors?" The accusation, thinly veiled, settled on Meredith's shoulders like a shroud. She bristled at the implication that she was somehow to blame, simply for letting a wounded animal sleep by her door. "I've done nothing wrong," she insisted, her voice cracking with emotion. Prescott didn't argue, but he didn't comfort her either. He simply closed his file, signaling the end of the interview. "We'll be in touch. For now, go home and stay away from that dog." When Meredith stepped out into the reception area, she could see the shepherd again, now lying with his head on his paws, eyes fixed on the door, as if waiting for her. Their gazes met across the distance, his full of confusion, hers flooded with guilt and gratitude. In the hallway, Eric reappeared, shuffling papers but pausing just long enough to murmur, "Hang in there. They're pulling CCTV from Main Street. Something was picked up last night. Maybe it'll clear things up." Meredith nodded, uncertain whether to feel hopeful or afraid. The shepherd was led away, the clang of the kennel door closing echoing in her ears, and as she walked out into the midday sun, she wondered if the town would ever see her, or the shepherd, as anything more than suspects. A CCTV video from a nearby street was discovered. The tension in the police station was different this morning, tighter, tinged with anticipation and uncertainty rather than outright suspicion. Meredith sat in a hard-backed chair along one wall of the sheriff's office, the muted hum of electronic equipment and murmurs of police radios weaving an anxious undercurrent through the room. Eric Malloy stood close by, arms folded, his expression guarded yet attentive. Across the desk, Chief Prescott leaned forward, lips pursed, eyes narrowed on the flat screen mounted above a battered filing cabinet. A tech specialist, a young woman with cropped hair and a Cedarbrook PD lanyard, was hunched over the computer, fingers tapping with nervous precision. "This is the footage you requested, Chief," she said, voice steady but tense. "Captured from the municipal camera at the intersection of Oak and Elm, last night at 9:43 p.m. The footage flickered to life, grainy and dimly lit, but the shapes were clear enough. Meredith's breath caught as she recognized the shepherd, battered and limping, yet moving with a strange sense of purpose. The dog trotted out of a narrow alley, pausing on the edge of the sidewalk. Then, a small form appeared, a little girl in a bright yellow jacket wandering far too close to the curb. Without hesitation, the shepherd bounded forward, teeth bared not in aggression, but in alarm. He gently but urgently nudged the child away from the edge, his body placing itself between her and the street. The camera's viewpoint shifted as headlights filled the frame. A massive delivery truck barreling down the road, horn blaring at the last possible second. For an agonizing moment, everyone in the office was silent. The truck screeched as it swerved, barely missing the child, but its right fender clipped the shepherd, sending the animal tumbling against the curb. The dog staggered upright, even as blood darkened his flank, and pressed himself close to the girl, refusing to leave her side until an adult, unseen except for a flash of a sleeve, rushed into view. Meredith felt a surge of vindication and horror twist together in her chest. "He saved her," she said, her voice trembling but proud. "He risked everything for that little girl. Look, he protected her." But Chief Prescott shook his head, a frown creasing deeper into his weathered face. "Or he chased her into the street. Sometimes animals act on instinct. Could have spooked her, for all we know." "That's not what happened," Meredith snapped, unable to contain the rising frustration. "You saw the same video I did. He pushed her out of harm's way. You can see it," Eric interjected, moving closer to the monitor and squinting at the paused frame. "Can you rewind 10 seconds?" he asked the tech. She complied, reversing the sequence, and Eric pointed at the upper left corner. "Wait, look here. That truck. Do you see the driver's face?" The tech zoomed in, enhancing the video as best she could. The digital image sharpened until a familiar silhouette emerged in the driver's window, a heavyset man with a distinctive Stetson hat. Prescott leaned in, surprise flashing across his stern features. That's Glenn Jones. He's been in this town longer than I have. Runs the hardware store." A cold wave washed over Meredith, memories surfacing with shocking clarity. Glenn Jones, her late husband's fishing buddy, a fixture at every Sunday potluck. The man who'd once helped her fix the porch swing. "Glenn," she whispered. "Are you sure?" Eric nodded, his tone cautious but determined. "No doubt about it. The timestamp matches when Glenn would have been driving back from the supply run." Prescott's skepticism flickered for a moment, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "So, what are you saying? Jones just happened to be the driver the night a little girl nearly got killed? And this stray dog just happened to be at the right place at the right time?" Meredith leaned forward, feeling the balance of suspicion shifting. Maybe the shepherd knew something was wrong. Maybe he was following the girl, or the truck, because he sensed danger. That's what those dogs are bred for, you know. Protection. Loyalty. Eric glanced at Prescott, then back at Meredith. "She has a point. If that's Glenn Jones, he might have answers we need. And the shepherd. He's more than just a stray. He saved a life last night." Prescott's jaw worked silently for a moment as he mulled over the new evidence, but his pride refused to fully let go. "We'll bring Jones in for questioning, but the dog stays in holding until we know more. If he's involved, we'll find out." Meredith's indignation flared. "You're still treating that poor animal like a criminal when he's the only one who's done anything heroic here." "Ma'am?" the tech interjected, looking over her shoulder. "There's another camera that picks up the intersection from the other angle. Want me to pull it up?" Prescott waved her off, the tension simmering in the air. "Let's not jump to conclusions. But Malloy, escort Mrs. Sloane out. She's free to go for now. We'll call if we need her." Eric gently steered Meredith toward the door. As they walked out into the hallway, he lowered his voice. "Don't let the chief get to you. He's stubborn. But the evidence is on your side. I'll keep digging. If there's more to this, we'll find it." Meredith paused in the corridor, heart pounding, her anger giving way to determination. The shepherd was still behind bars, but for the first time, she saw a crack in the wall of blame that had closed in around her. And the twist, the driver's identity, lit a fuse inside her. She'd trusted Glenn Jones for years. If he was involved, she needed to know why. Meredith was released, but the fire inside her was burning now. She would find out what happened, even if it meant investigating the people she once called friends. Meredith's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her faded shawl tighter around her shoulders, stepping off the uneven curb and pushing open the door of Dottie's Cafe. The familiar chime above the door rang through the cozy space, mingling with the hiss of the espresso machine and the low hum of late-morning conversation. For a moment, Meredith felt exposed under the sidelong glances of patrons who'd already heard her name circulate on social media, suspicions and rumors moving faster than the wind in Cedarbrook. She found Glenn Jones hunched over a chipped mug in the corner booth, his posture oddly tense for a man who'd built a life on easy laughter and neighborly help. The Stetson he always wore sat beside him, the brim stained from years of honest work. When he looked up, his eyes flickered. Recognition, regret, a shadow of something heavier. "Meredith," he said quietly, his voice roughened by too many years and too many secrets. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." She sat opposite him, folding her hands tightly in her lap to steady them. "We need to talk, Glenn. It's about last night, about the accident." He nodded, staring into the black depths of his coffee. "I've already spoken to Prescott. Said my piece. There's nothing more." "There is, Glenn," Meredith interrupted, her voice gaining firmness. "I saw the video. I know it was you driving that truck. I know the shepherd saved that little girl. And I know you saw something. The look on your face. You saw more than you're saying." Jones's jaw worked, a muscle twitching near his temple. He glanced out the window as if he might find an escape there. "You shouldn't get involved in this, Meredith. Some things are better left alone." "Don't give me that," she pressed. "You were always the one telling me Cedarbrook was a community, that we look out for each other. A child almost died last night. A stray dog was nearly killed. Now my name's being dragged through the mud because nobody will tell the truth. What did you see, Glenn?" He hesitated, a tremor of real fear crossing his weathered face. The cafe's usual warmth felt brittle, fragile. Something else simmered underneath the familiar routine. I saw a man dragging something heavy behind the fence," Jones whispered, lowering his voice so only Meredith could hear. "I thought it was just trash, but then I saw the shepherd, blood on his side, snapping at the man's heels. The man turned, his face. Meredith, I shouldn't." He stopped abruptly, shaking his head as if to banish the memory. "There are things in this town you don't understand. Things that go way back, that never really healed. I know what happened to that girl's shoe. But talking about it," he swallowed, eyes darting to the cafe owner wiping tables nearby. "Talking about it won't help anyone. Some things you can't bring back. Some things you don't dare name." Meredith felt her frustration rising. "Glenn, if you know who hurt that child, you have to." But at that exact moment, the tranquil rhythm of the cafe shattered. From outside, a piercing, insistent bark erupted. Sharp, desperate, almost human in its urgency. Heads turned as the shepherd burst into view, pressing his body against the glass door, tail whipping in frantic agitation. He fixed his gaze on Meredith, eyes wide with a message she couldn't quite read. The cafe patrons fell silent, then began muttering as the dog pawed the glass, whining and barking in short, urgent bursts. Glenn stiffened, staring as if he'd seen a ghost. "That's the same dog, isn't it?" he managed, voice suddenly hollow. Meredith stood, heart pounding. She barely noticed the eyes following her as she hurried to the door. The shepherd met her on the sidewalk, circling her once, then gently gripping her sleeve in his mouth. Not to hurt, but to pull. The force behind his action was impossible to ignore. It was as if he was pleading for her to come, to trust him, to see what he needed her to see. "Meredith, don't," Glenn called after her, but she barely heard him. With a final glance at the cafe, at the man who once felt like family and now felt like a stranger, Meredith let herself be led by the shepherd. The dog's pace quickened, weaving through parked cars, cutting across the back alley where the garbage bins overflowed, and a rusted swing set creaked in the wind. She followed, adrenaline rising, hope and dread tangling in her chest. At the edge of the old industrial lot, the town's unofficial dumping ground, known to everyone as the Bai Fi Luo, the shepherd stopped, barking wildly, front paws scraping at the packed earth near a stack of broken pallets. Meredith's shoes crunched on glass as she caught up, breathless. The shepherd's eyes never left hers, his need so raw, so unmistakable, that Meredith felt her fear give way to grim determination. Whatever he wanted her to see, she would see it. Whatever dark secret Cedarbrook was hiding, she would bring it to light. She was done being a bystander to her own life. With one last look over her shoulder, Meredith took a deep breath and stepped towards the unknown, following the shepherd into the maze of debris and shadow. She decided to follow the dog, wherever he would lead her. The shepherd led Meredith with a kind of desperate wisdom, pulling her across the weedy, uneven field toward a hulking, derelict warehouse that sat alone at the edge of Cedarbrook's forgotten industrial district. The building's corrugated siding, pockmarked by decades of wind and rain, rattled in the late afternoon breeze. Its windows were scabbed with grime and fractured glass, the yard strewn with cast-off pallets, rusted barrels, and wind-tossed scraps of newspaper. For a brief moment, Meredith hesitated at the threshold, the ghosts of every urban legend she'd heard about this place whispering in her ears. But the shepherd pressed on, refusing to let fear slow his stride. The old service door hung ajar, its hinges groaning as the dog nosed his way inside. Meredith swallowed, steeling herself as she followed him into the cavernous gloom. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rust. Faint shafts of light filtered through the cracked roof, painting wavering pools on the dirty concrete. The dog paused, ears cocked, nose quivering, then darted to the far side of the warehouse, where the floor sloped downward toward a cluster of crumpled boxes and oil-stained tarps. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence, a faint, trembling whimper, barely audible above the distant traffic and the restless scrape of metal on metal. Meredith's breath caught in her throat. She could make out, beneath the rubble, the unmistakable sound of a child's muffled cries. Her heart slammed against her chest, fear and hope warring inside her. The shepherd's body tensed. With frantic paws, he began digging at a patch of loose earth between the broken floorboards and a toppled metal drum. His claws sent up small clouds of dust, and his tail thrashed in anxious urgency. Meredith knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she joined in the effort, tossing aside chunks of wood and plaster. Her knees ached, and splinters bit at her palms, but the only thing that mattered was the sound, growing louder now, of a child's whimpering sobs. She peeled back a rotting board, and there, in a shallow hollow, huddled a small figure, Aubrey. The girl's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide and wild with terror. She shrank from the light, her thin arms clutching a filthy blanket as if it might shield her from the world's cruelty. The shepherd whimpered, nose nudging her gently, tail thumping with relief. "Aubrey," Meredith choked out, voice trembling. "Sweetheart, you're safe now, I promise. You're safe." The girl blinked up at her, confusion and disbelief flickering in her gaze. But the dog, sensing the last of her fear, pressed his warm body close, licking her cheek in reassurance. It was the first time Aubrey's sobs paused, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp a tuft of his fur, as if she could anchor herself in the world again. Before Meredith could gather her thoughts, hurried footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Jones appeared at the threshold, his face pale and drawn, eyes darting from Meredith to the child and back. For a heartbeat, his whole frame seemed to sag in relief, then tense again with dread. "Glenn, you saw this, didn't you?" Meredith's voice was sharp, the question more an accusation than an inquiry. "You knew she was here?" He shook his head miserably. "I didn't know exactly. I just saw someone come this way last night, after the accident. I wanted to help, but, Meredith, they threatened me. They said if I talked, there'd be trouble for everyone." She stared at him, the weight of his words settling like lead in her chest. "Who threatened you, Glenn?" He opened his mouth, but at that moment, the squeal of sneakers on concrete announced another arrival, Officer Eric Malloy, breathless and wide-eyed. He took in the scene. Meredith, mud-stained and wild-eyed, Aubrey, pale and trembling, the shepherd, standing guard over them both, and Jones, haunted and broken. "What's going on?" Eric demanded, his hand hovering near his radio. "Is she— Oh my God, that's the missing girl!" "Yes," Meredith replied, tears streaming down her face. "She's alive. The dog found her." Eric knelt beside the child, his practiced hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. He glanced at the shepherd, noting a fresh gash along the animal's side, blood seeping into the matted fur. "This dog, he's been through hell," Eric murmured, admiration mixing with concern. But his gaze sharpened as he turned to Jones. "What are you doing here, Mr. Jones?" Jones stammered. "I was trying to help. I swear it. But there's more to this, officer. I'm not the only one who knows something." Eric's suspicion was obvious, but the urgency of Aubrey's condition cut through the tension. "We need to get her to safety, now." He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Malloy. I've located the missing girl. Repeat, I have Aubrey. Request immediate medical and backup units at the old Lawson warehouse, South Lot." In the flurry of movement that followed, Eric wrapped Aubrey in his jacket while Meredith held her hand. The shepherd pressed close, refusing to be parted from either of them. Outside, the wail of approaching sirens began to cut through the hush of late afternoon, yet even as relief washed through Meredith, a new unease grew. Jones lingered, torn between guilt and fear. "Meredith," he whispered, voice cracking. "There's something bigger here. They wanted her hidden. They wanted me scared. Be careful who you trust." Eric caught the tail end of the exchange, his suspicion growing deeper. But he kept his focus on Aubrey and the wounded shepherd, his admiration for the dog clear in every glance. Rescue teams were on their way, but Meredith knew the real story was just beginning. The evening that followed felt unreal, like the town had been swept into a whirlwind, shaken from the inside out. Flashing red and blue lights cast wild shadows against the hospital's sterile white walls as Meredith sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, her knuckles white around a paper cup of bitter coffee. The air was thick with fear, relief, and a current of silent questions that no one dared voice aloud. In the trauma room behind her, Aubrey lay still, a wisp of a child shivering beneath warm blankets while nurses fluttered around her. Meredith watched through the glass as the girl's mother, Elise, sobbed openly, her hands trembling as she brushed dirt and dried blood from Aubrey's brow. Elise's tears were not only of terror but of astonishment. Her relief had come with an unexpected twist, and it rippled through the small hospital like a shockwave. "Who found her?" she choked, looking up at the staff, at Eric, at Meredith, everyone but the dog, who now sat in the hallway with a crude bandage wrapped around his bleeding flank. His eyes never left Aubrey's door. "It was the dog," Eric answered softly. "He led us right to her." At that, Elise's face crumpled. For a moment, she was speechless. Then the words tumbled out, ragged, breathless, full of disbelief. "That dog? The same filthy stray people wanted out of town? The one everyone said was dangerous?" Meredith, standing awkwardly nearby, could only nod. There was a heaviness in her chest, a remorse that pressed against her ribs. She remembered, all too vividly, the look in the shepherd's eyes that first night, the plea she'd ignored in her fear. Now, as Aubrey's mother wept, Meredith felt shame mixing with awe. She knelt beside the shepherd, brushing a trembling hand over his soiled coat, whispering an apology too quiet for anyone else to hear. Down the hall, Eric conferred with Dwayne Prescott, who had shown up with an air of authority sharpened by suspicion. Dwayne's expression was unreadable. He cast a long, appraising stare at Meredith, at the shepherd, at the grieving mother and child. When he spoke, his voice was cold, practiced, bureaucratic. "The dog is still a liability," he declared, loud enough for the nurses and bystanders to hear. "We can't risk another incident. He's to be kept under observation at the animal shelter. Psych evaluation, behavioral analysis, the works. I want him out of Cedarbrook if he's a threat." Eric's jaw tensed. "With respect to Chief, he just saved a little girl's life. That should count for something." Dwayne's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules, Malloy. If you can't see that, you're not ready for this job." The drama was like a live wire, sparking in every corner of the hospital. Meredith stood, indignant, but Dwayne silenced her with a wave of his hand. "Enough. I don't want any more trouble tonight. Malloy, you see the dog is secured. Sloan, go home and stay there. Let the professionals do their job." Meredith nearly bit back a retort, but stopped short as a nurse appeared at the doorway, urgent. "She's waking up. Aubrey's waking up." They crowded into the room. Aubrey's eyelids fluttered, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Elise clasped her daughter's hand as Eric hovered at the foot of the bed, his gaze gentle but intent. "Sweetheart, you're safe now," Elise whispered, brushing hair from Aubrey's forehead. But Aubrey's eyes darted to the shepherd, who, despite orders, had slipped into the room, limping, tail low but wagging. She reached for him, small fingers twining in his fur. "He saved me," she said hoarsely. "He chased away the bad man." Elise choked on a sob. "What bad man, honey?" Aubrey shivered, drawing closer to the shepherd for comfort. "He wore a mask. He grabbed me and told me not to scream. But the dog bit his arm and barked and wouldn't stop until the man ran away. The dog saved me." The room fell silent, the truth hanging between them. Eric looked at Meredith with fresh understanding. Dwayne's face grew tight with doubt. "So, there was someone else," Eric said quietly. "Someone hiding behind all this." Dwayne cleared his throat, hiding unease behind officialdom. "We'll get a statement from the girl when she's stable. Until then, that animal is not to leave the shelter. I'll handle this, Malloy." But even he seemed uncertain, glancing back at the shepherd, whose loyalty and gentle presence now filled the room like sunlight through a stormy sky. It was clear to Meredith that Dwayne was determined to find fault with the dog, regardless of what anyone else believed. After Elise pulled Aubrey close and the nurses went about their work, Eric stepped into the hallway with Meredith, lowering his voice. Something's not right. That dog isn't just a stray. He knew exactly where to find Aubrey. He protected her from someone who meant harm. I don't buy Dwayne's story about protocol. There's more to this. Meredith's heart pounded as she watched the shepherd settle at Aubrey's bedside, his head resting protectively across her legs. I need to know who he is, she said, her resolve hardening. That dog saved a child when no one else could. He's not going to take the fall for this town's fears. Outside, night pressed against the glass, the world shifting between relief and suspicion. Meredith knew her work was just beginning. The shepherd's true story was still a mystery, and there was no telling how deep the secrets ran. And as dawn crept over Cedar Brook, Meredith made a silent vow. She would not rest until she uncovered the truth about the dog who had brought the town face to face with its conscience. Meredith's heart had not stopped pounding since the night at the hospital. It wasn't just worry for Aubrey, who still slept fitfully in her room upstairs, or for the town that now seemed to teeter on the edge of collective guilt. Something deeper gnawed at her, a mixture of shame, guilt, and the sharp edge of hope, all focused on the battered shepherd who had upended her life. That morning, under a pale sun, Meredith bundled Ranger, a name she'd found herself whispering unconsciously, into the back seat of her Subaru. He settled in quietly, brown eyes alert but not afraid, as if he'd ridden to the vet 1,000 times before. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, seeing not a stray, but a creature bearing the weight of things left unspoken, stories only dogs could carry. The bell above the door chimed as they entered the small animal clinic on Maple Street. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the aroma of fresh coffee. Dr. Lainey Ward, a compact woman with silver hair pulled into a braid and sharp, kind eyes, looked up from her paperwork with a knowing smile. "Morning, Meredith. Who's this handsome guy?" she said, but her voice caught when she saw the scars on Ranger's body, the fresh wound stitched from the warehouse, and the older marks crisscrossing his side. "He's been through it, hasn't he?" Meredith knelt, one hand steadying Ranger's collar. "He saved Aubrey. The police still think he's trouble, but I need to know who he is, Lainey." Eric Malloy arrived moments later, file folder in hand, and tension etched across his young face. "I'm glad you brought him here, Mrs. Sloan," he said quietly, ignoring the glance Lainey shot his way. "Something about this whole thing doesn't add up." Lainey fetched her microchip scanner, crouching to meet Ranger's steady gaze. "It's okay, buddy," she murmured. "Let's see what story you've been carrying." The scanner beeped, flashing a string of numbers on the screen. Lainey's eyes widened. She read the number again, then tapped at her computer, pulling up a record in the state database. "His name is Ranger," she announced, almost reverently. "Registered as a K-9 rescue with the state's Emergency Response Division. His file says he went missing in action 3 years ago, during the Wildwood chemical plant fire. That was a huge deal. The news ran stories for weeks. They never found him." Eric's jaw tightened as he sifted through his folder. "That's not all. The original police file was marked confidential, but there's a discrepancy here. Look." He held up a page for Lainey and Meredith to see. "The official report says Ranger was lost in the confusion. But here, on the backup server, there's a note about him being deliberately separated from his handler. Someone tried to scrub it from the record." Lainey's face darkened. "Who would do that to a service dog?" Eric shook his head. "The fire was suspicious. There were rumors of arson and a whistleblower who vanished. It was all covered up." A chill slid down Meredith's spine. Ranger sat calmly by her side, head tilted as if following every word. She reached out, stroking the battered shepherd with trembling hands. Memory flared. Her name on an adoption application, the ache of turning away when the time had come. Years ago, she had visited the county shelter and seen the same deep, soulful eyes staring back at her, full of a yearning she'd been too afraid to answer. Her husband had just died. She couldn't open her heart to more loss. She whispered, pain cracking her voice. "I almost adopted him, Lainey. Years ago, after Bob passed. I remember those eyes. I was too broken, and I let him go." The weight of regret nearly brought her to her knees. Ranger pressed his nose into her palm, as if to forgive her without a word. Eric's phone buzzed with a new alert. "There's more," he muttered, scrolling rapidly. A local watchdog group flagged the Wildwood file last year for missing evidence. Someone in the Cedar Brook police shut them down. Dwayne Prescott's name comes up more than once. Lainey's brow furrowed, understanding blooming on her face. "They were afraid Ranger might remember something." Canines are trained to detect accelerants, track scents. He could identify who set that fire. The revelation hung in the room like an accusation. Before Meredith could reply, the door slammed open. Sheriff Dwayne Prescott stormed in, his uniform immaculate, his eyes icy. "Step away from the animal, Mrs. Sloan. Officer Malloy, you're out of line bringing her here. Dr. Ward, I have an order. Ranger is to be taken into protective custody pending a full evaluation for everyone's safety." Meredith surged to her feet, shielding Ranger with her body. "He's not a threat. He's a hero, Dwayne. He saved a child. He saved me. Why are you so afraid of this dog?" Dwayne's face hardened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Meredith. The law is clear. You want to help the investigation, you let us do our jobs." The air was electric with confrontation. Eric glancing at Meredith, as if silently pleading with her to stand firm. Laney reaching out protectively toward Ranger, the shepherd himself poised but unafraid, trusting in the people who, at last, seemed willing to fight for him. Just as the standoff reached its breaking point, Dwayne raised a radio and spoke quietly into it, signaling his deputies outside. Ranger's future, and perhaps the truth behind Wildwood, hung in the balance. By noon, the air in Cedarbrook was thick with tension. Restless, urgent, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Word of Ranger's detainment spread faster than wildfire, fueled by whispers, text messages, and a flurry of posts on the local Facebook groups. It was as if every conversation in the grocery aisles, at the diner counters, and along the school pickup lines turned to the same subject, the hero dog, and the widow who refused to let him be forgotten. On the steps of Town Hall, beneath a fluttering American flag and the solemn brick facade, a crowd gathered. Laney Ward stood at the forefront, her white vet's coat thrown over her shoulders like a banner, a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, live streaming the scene for those who couldn't be there. Eric Malloy, his uniform rumpled and face unshaven, hovered nearby, his jaw clenched in determination as he fielded reporters' questions and tried to keep the peace. Meredith, pressed in among her neighbors, clutched a handmade sign, "Justice for Ranger. Justice for all." Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of standing up for something she knew, deep in her bones, was right. Reporters from Channel 9 had arrived with their camera vans, eager for a story that was both human and heart-wrenching. A young journalist in a red blazer leaned into her microphone, breathless. "This is the scene outside Cedarbrook Town Hall, where dozens of residents have gathered, demanding the release of a local K-9 they now call Ranger the Rescuer." Behind her, townsfolk began to chant, "Let him go! Let him go!" The call echoed down Main Street, growing with each new arrival. Some brought hand-drawn posters of dogs, or wore T-shirts from the animal shelter's last adoption event. Mothers balanced toddlers on their hips. Teens snapped photos and uploaded them to Instagram, using hashtags like Free Ranger and Cedarbrook Stands Together. At the center of the crowd, Mrs. Harper, Aubrey's mother, stood tall, her eyes red from sleepless nights and tears. In her arms, she held a framed photograph, her daughter, beaming, with Ranger beside her. "If not for that dog," she declared, voice trembling yet steady, "my Aubrey wouldn't be here. He's not a stray, he's a hero, and heroes deserve better than this." The momentum built as more people arrived. Some carried photos of their lost pets, relics of grief and hope. Others waved signs reading, "No more forgotten dogs," and "Our town, our values." What had begun as a few whispers of dissent now rolled into a full-throated protest, united, passionate, and impossible to ignore. Inside the animal control van, parked behind the police cordon, Ranger waited. Through a sliver of the window, he could see the shifting shapes of the crowd, hear the familiar timbre of Meredith's voice carried on the breeze, and then, as if drawn by instinct alone, he thumped his tail, not once, not twice, but 3 times, against the metal wall of his cage. Laney, standing at the van's door, caught the sound. Tears pricked her eyes. She motioned for Meredith to come closer, though the officers tried to hold her back. "He knows you're here," Laney called out, voice wavering. "He's trying to say something." The crowd fell silent as Meredith stepped forward, her heart hammering. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, whispering, "I'm here, Ranger. I'm not going anywhere this time." As if on cue, the shepherd's tail thumped again. 3 measured beats that cut through the tension and spoke a language only the heart could understand. For a moment, the whole town seemed to listen, transfixed by the depth of a bond no law or accusation could erase. The silence was broken by the sudden arrival of Sheriff Dwayne Prescott. He strode from the town hall's front doors, flanked by deputies, his posture rigid and face set in stone. He looked out over the crowd with cool disdain, his voice booming over the makeshift PA system. "This is an official police operation," Dwayne announced, his tone clipped and authoritarian. "I am ordering all unauthorized persons, including Mrs. Meredith Sloan, to vacate the premises immediately. Further interference with law enforcement business will not be tolerated." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Meredith's cheeks flushed with fury, but she refused to move, locking eyes with Dwayne as if daring him to back down. Around her, friends and strangers alike closed ranks, forming a human shield. But Dwayne was prepared. He signaled to his deputies, who began gently but firmly, ushering people away from the cordon. "This is not the time for a circus," he snapped. "Let us do our jobs." Journalists shouted questions. Flashes popped, but Dwayne ignored them, his gaze fixed on Meredith. "You have 5 minutes to leave this area, Mrs. Sloan, or you'll be removed by force." For the first time in her life, Meredith considered defiance. The older would have turned away, too afraid, too weary to fight. But seeing Ranger's eyes behind that glass, hearing the echo of his faith, she drew herself up and faced the sheriff. "This isn't justice," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "This is fear." But even as her words hung in the air, she felt hands on her shoulders, gentle, apologetic, guiding her away from the town hall steps. Just as the crowd began to disperse, a ripple of anger and heartbreak ran through their ranks. The protest was over for now, but the movement was only beginning. Dwayne suddenly ordered Meredith to be removed from the area to quell the growing uproar. The council chamber of Cedarbrook's modest town hall was buzzing with reporters and onlookers, the heavy air punctuated only by the hum of camera equipment and the staccato tapping of anxious fingers on mobile phones. Meredith Sloan sat alone at a long table under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, a single microphone poised before her, every eye in the room expectant, and every lens trained on her worn but dignified face. Across from her, Dwayne Prescott wore his badge with an air of practiced authority, his lips pressed into a thin, impatient line as he prepared to deflect whatever criticism the town was about to unleash. Eric Malloy stood quietly in the back, hands clasped, his eyes darting between Meredith and the mayor, knowing this moment was bigger than either of them, a battle not just for a dog's life, but for the soul of their town. The hush grew thick as a local news anchor gestured, signaling that they were going live. Meredith took a breath, the weight of her 61 years, and all the losses she'd endured sitting squarely on her shoulders. Yet, in this moment, there was a glimmer of something fierce in her eyes. She began, her voice steady, not trembling as many expected. "I never imagined I'd be here today fighting for a life most people would have just walked past. But I'm here because we all saw a dog, a shepherd named Ranger, drag himself to my porch when nobody else cared if he lived or died. And when the world turned away, that animal tried to save a child no one else could find." Her words hit the crowd like a wave, reporters leaning in, townsfolk shifting uncomfortably, reminded of their quick judgments, their quiet indifference. Meredith pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. "Ranger is not a threat. He's not a stray. He's a hero who suffered for his loyalty, who put himself between danger and the innocent, not just once but again and again. If we as a community can't see the value in that, then what have we become?" Dwayne Prescott, arms folded, tried to break the emotional momentum. "Miss Sloan, it's a matter of public safety. The town can't risk another incident. Emotional appeals won't change the rules." But Meredith was undeterred. "With all due respect, Chief Prescott, rules didn't save Aubrey Barnes. Rules didn't find her in that warehouse. It was a dog's heart, a heart you're trying to silence." The statement hung in the air, bristling with the painful truth of it. A young reporter in a crisp blue blazer raised her hand. "Miss Sloan, what will you do if they take Ranger away for good? If he never comes home?" The question lingered, sharp and unsparing, forcing Meredith to confront her deepest fear. She paused, her hands trembling just slightly as she looked down at the table, searching for an answer in the scuffs and scratches of the wood. "I'll do what any of you would do if it were your family on the line," she said, looking up, her voice barely above a whisper yet cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'll fight, because he deserves it, because he fought for us when we did nothing for him." There was a ripple through the crowd, soft murmurs, a few faces streaked with tears, a few jaws set in defiance, and in that stillness, as if on cue, Eric Malloy quietly slipped behind Meredith, bending just enough to press a small plastic card, a micro SD, into her palm beneath the table. "Nobody's watching," Eric whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is the chip scan from Ranger. There's something you need to see. Evidence from the night he disappeared." Dwayne noticed the exchange but could not stop it. The mayor tried to seize the spotlight, dismissing the growing unrest as hysteria, but the crowd was no longer listening. They were with Meredith now. The room was alive with a new energy, an undercurrent of hope, outrage, and something like redemption for a town that desperately needed it. Meredith's hands closed around the memory card, her resolve hardening. She knew exactly what to do next. She would take Ranger's story, every shred of evidence, every moment of heartbreak and hope, and broadcast it to the world. She would make sure no one could look away ever again. That night, as the clock struck midnight and the town lay restless beneath a thick summer sky, Meredith logged onto her old laptop. She began to type, her fingers flying with the urgency of someone who knew time was short and the stakes were everything. She uploaded the story, her story, of a dog sacrifice and a community's second chance, attaching the proof Eric had risked his career to give her. The internet does not sleep, and within hours the story began to spread, first to neighboring counties, then statewide, then across the nation. Meredith went online and shared Ranger's story, along with shocking evidence. The morning after Meredith's post went live, Cedarbrook felt changed. The crisp summer air seemed charged with a new sense of purpose. The Central Park, usually just a sleepy patch of grass where kids tossed frisbees and retirees played chess, was now transformed into the pulsing heart of the town. Word had spread quickly, and as the sun climbed over the oaks, families, students, shop owners, and old-timers gathered in twos and threes, drawn together by a single purpose: to demand justice for Ranger. At the heart of the crowd stood Meredith, flanked by Eric Malloy and Dr. Laney Ward. Her posture was ramrod straight, her face flushed with the kind of pride that made her seem both older and younger at once. Ranger, wearing a makeshift medal and a faded red bandana, sat quietly by her side, his tail thumping softly, a living emblem of everything the town now stood for. The park was soon awash in homemade posters. "Set Ranger free! Hero, not menace! We stand with Ranger!" held high by children and adults alike. A table covered with a blue checkered cloth became the station for a petition, where neighbor after neighbor added their signature to a growing stack of names, each pen stroke a small act of rebellion against injustice. Laney stood at the edge of the table, fielding questions from reporters and local bloggers. "Ranger isn't just a stray," she told them, her eyes never leaving the dog. "He's a decorated rescue K9 who put himself in harm's way to protect a child. He has done more for this town than some people who wear a badge." Nearby, Aubrey's mother gently hugged Meredith. "If it wasn't for Ranger, I'd have lost my little girl. You saved her, too," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. Meredith simply nodded, her own eyes shining, overwhelmed by the waves of gratitude and sorrow that washed over her. Then came the videos. Kids and parents took out their phones, uploading clips to TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Snippets of Ranger guiding lost children home. Footage from the CCTV showing his desperate efforts to alert someone. Slow-motion shots of him shielding Aubrey from the oncoming truck. Soon, a local news anchor arrived and broadcast live from the park. Social media hashtags Ranger the Hero and Let Him Go began to trend, first locally, then across the state. Amid all this hope, a shadow loomed. Chief Dwayne Prescott stood on the park's perimeter, arms crossed, his jaw set like stone as he watched the crowd swell and the movement take shape. His phone buzzed with notifications, calls from the mayor's office, emails from the city council, and angry texts from fellow officers. Every notification felt like a personal affront. With every new signature on the petition, every tearful testimonial, he felt his control slipping, his reputation fraying at the edges. That's when Dwayne snapped. Pulling aside a rookie officer, he muttered harshly, "She wants a fight? I'll give her one." Within the hour, a legal notice was drawn up, accusing Meredith of knowingly disseminating false and harmful information about law enforcement operations. A charge meant to silence her, to remind everyone who still held power in Cedarbrook. but the momentum was unstoppable. Just as a reporter began to interview Meredith about the notice, a small commotion broke out near the stage. Ranger, who had been patiently lying at Meredith's feet, suddenly staggered to his side. His breaths grew ragged, eyes glazed with confusion and pain. His body trembled, and then, as if in slow motion, the shepherd collapsed on the grass, his body going limp amid the circle of concerned townsfolk. Gasps rang out, and the crowd parted like a wave. Lainey rushed to Ranger's side, her hands gentle but urgent, checking for a pulse. Meredith dropped to her knees, stroking Ranger's head, her breath coming in short bursts as panic threatened to consume her. Eric knelt, face grim. "We have to get him to the clinic, now!" he barked, already reaching for his phone to call for help. Within moments, Ranger was lifted carefully into Lainey's battered Subaru, Meredith riding in the back with the shepherd's heavy head cradled in her lap, whispering desperate prayers into his ear as they sped through the streets. The crowd watched them go in stunned silence, the sense of celebration replaced by a suffocating fear that their hero, their symbol of hope, might not make it. Behind them, the petition table stood deserted but defiant, the signatures flapping in the breeze, a testament to the will of the people, even as their champion's fate hung in the balance. Meredith and Lainey, terrified, rushed Ranger to the clinic. The storm outside was building, wind rattling the windows of Dr. Lainey Ward's veterinary clinic and tossing leaves down the deserted main street of Cedarbrook. Inside, a different kind of storm raged, a storm of fear, grief, and helpless hope. Meredith sat hunched on a hard plastic chair in the dim waiting room, her trembling hands still marked by Ranger's fur. Her eyes, red and swollen, never left the swinging doors to the surgical suite. Lainey worked with steady urgency in the operating room, her forehead beaded with sweat. Ranger's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a battle against the infection that had crept through his wounded side. She murmured quiet encouragement to him as she shaved the fur, sterilized the area, and prepared to suture a laceration that had festered beneath his thick coat, an injury so severe that, had it gone another day, would have ended his life. Eric Malloy paced the hallway, his badge swinging at his hip. His nerves were stretched taut, every sense heightened by adrenaline and dread. The young officer's mind raced. The legal notice against Meredith, Dwayne's tightening grip on the town, and now, this dog, whose life seemed intertwined with the fate of the entire community. Eric's phone buzzed violently in his pocket, startling him. He ducked into the empty reception office to answer, away from Meredith's earshot. A low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "Officer Malloy, this is Chief Prescott. Listen carefully. Don't let Mrs. Sloan out of your sight. She's not to leave the clinic, not for any reason until I say so." "Understood." Eric stiffened, hesitating for a fraction of a second, then replied, "Copy that, sir," though his heart twisted at the order. What did Dwayne suspect? And why was he suddenly so interested in Meredith's movements? Back in the waiting room, Meredith rocked back and forth, lost in guilt and desperation. She buried her face in her hands. "This is my fault," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "If only I'd let him in sooner. If only I hadn't turned him away. He never would have been hurt." Her voice broke. "I owe him everything, Lainey. He saved Aubrey. He saved all of us." Through the glass, she watched Lainey's silhouette bend over Ranger's still form. The sound of the monitors, a faint beeping, the soft hiss of oxygen, was a cruel reminder of how fragile life could be. Eric came back into the room, awkwardly clearing his throat. "How's he doing?" he asked, voice low. Lainey didn't look up. "I'm doing everything I can," she said, her voice tight. "The infection was worse than I thought. He's tough, but—" She let the sentence dangle in the air, unfinished, too afraid to give it shape. Meredith stood, unable to sit still. "Let me in there," she pleaded. "Let me talk to him. Maybe he'll hear me. Maybe it'll help." Lainey hesitated, then nodded. Meredith slipped into the surgical suite, taking her place beside Ranger's head. The shepherd's eyes fluttered, his breathing ragged. Meredith reached out, stroking his ears, murmuring words of comfort. "Hang on, Ranger. Please, just hang on. You're not alone." Suddenly, Ranger's eyes flickered open for a brief, startling moment. His gaze found Meredith's, and he tried to lift his head, but his body refused to cooperate. A strangled, almost inaudible sound came from his throat, a desperate attempt at a bark, cut short by exhaustion and pain. And then, with the last of his strength, Ranger began to tap his paw against the metal leg of the operating table. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Meredith, startled, stared in confusion, unsure what to make of it. Laney, who had stepped aside to consult a chart, glanced over and froze. The pattern repeated. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, another pause, then 4. The hairs on her arms stood up. "Meredith, do you see that?" she whispered, grabbing her phone and recording the movement. "That's not random. He's trying to tell us something." Eric joined them at the doorway, peering in with growing concern. What's he doing?" he asked. Laney showed him the video. "It's a code, Eric. I think it's Morse. This dog is trained. There's something he wants us to know." Meredith wiped her eyes, her sorrow momentarily replaced by awe. "Even now he's still fighting for us." A hush fell over the room as Ranger slipped back into unconsciousness, his paw falling limp. The monitor beeped steadily, signaling the battle was not over yet. Outside, thunder cracked and rain lashed at the windows, nature echoing the tension in their hearts. Eric glanced at Meredith, the gravity of their situation finally settling over him. "Whatever he's trying to tell us, we need to figure it out. For him, for everyone." As Laney replayed the video, her fingers trembling, a new thread of hope took root among the fear and grief. Ranger was still reaching out, even from the edge. He was more than a victim. He was a messenger, refusing to let the truth die with him. Laney recorded this, and noticed something was very wrong. The first watery light of morning filtered through the clinic blinds, turning the white walls of the examination room a soft blue-gray. The storm had passed, but a heavy tension lingered in the air, coiling itself around the hearts of Meredith, Laney, and Eric as they huddled around the small table. Ranger, wrapped in blankets, lay quietly on his side, his breath finally even, but his strength not yet fully returned. Meredith, her hand never leaving his paw, watched with pained hopefulness as Laney replayed the video on her phone, the dog's paw tapping out the same deliberate sequence. Eric, his uniform rumpled from a night without sleep, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. 3 short taps. Pause. 2 taps. 4 taps. "It does sound like a code," he murmured. Laney grabbed a notepad, quickly jotting down the taps, translating them letter by letter. "Morse code," she said, glancing at Meredith with a sense of awe and disbelief. "I learned it in Scouts years ago. 3 short, S, 2 short, I, 4 short, H." She bit her lip, continuing the pattern. "There's more. O, W. Show. He's telling us to look or show. Wait, there's more. Collar. Oh my God, Meredith, he's saying there's something in his collar. Look, collar. Clear as day." Meredith's trembling hands reached for the battered leather collar at Ranger's neck, feeling along the seams and buckles, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. As her fingers traced the rough fabric, she discovered a small concealed pocket stitched beneath a patch of fur. She pried it open, and out tumbled a tiny micro SD card, no larger than a fingernail, but heavy with implication. Laney let out a gasp. "That's it! He's been carrying it all along." Eric quickly fished his phone from his pocket, using a tiny adapter to slot the card in. The others pressed close as a series of encrypted audio files appeared on the screen, time-stamped and labeled with dates that made Meredith's stomach clench, days corresponding to the timeline of Aubrey's disappearance. Eric selected the latest file and hit play. The grainy recording came to life in the silent room. Heavy breathing, a child's muffled cries, footsteps scraping on gravel. Then, clear as a bell, the gruff voice of Dwayne Prescott, the town's police chief, harsh and unmistakable, barking orders. "Keep her quiet. Nobody needs to know. If anyone asks, blame the damn dog. I'll handle the rest." Laney covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Meredith's knees nearly buckled beneath her. She gripped the table for support. Eric sat, stunned, as the implications settled over him. This wasn't just an accident. It was a cover-up, a betrayal by the very man sworn to protect them all. In the background of the recording, there was another sound. Ranger barking furiously, claws scrabbling against metal, trying desperately to reach the child. A scuffle, a yelp, then silence. Meredith felt tears sting her eyes as she realized Ranger had been there from the very start, fighting for Aubrey even when no one else believed in him. Eric's jaw tightened. "This is it. This is everything. This isn't just proof that Ranger's innocent. It's evidence that Prescott's behind the whole thing." Laney nodded, her voice trembling but resolute. We have to protect this file, and we have to protect you, Meredith. Dwayne won't let this go if he finds out we know." Meredith swallowed hard, looking down at Ranger, who blinked up at her with tired but trusting eyes. "He saved Aubrey. He saved me. We can't let Dwayne get away with this, not after everything Ranger has suffered." Eric stood, every muscle tense, as if he were bracing for a fight. "Meredith, you're not leaving this clinic until I can guarantee your safety. Laney, stay with Ranger. I'll call for backup, and I'll get this evidence to the state police. Dwayne won't touch you, not now." He placed a reassuring hand on Meredith's shoulder, the weight of his promise settling between them like a shield. The truth was finally in their hands, thanks to the battered, heroic shepherd lying on the table, a dog who had fought through pain, rejection, and near death to bring justice not only to a child, but to a whole community. As Eric left the room to call for help, Meredith knelt beside Ranger, her voice choked with gratitude and awe. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you," she whispered, stroking his grizzled head. "I promise I won't let anything happen to you again. Not ever." Ranger's tail thumped weakly in reply, as if to say he understood. The bond between them, forged in hardship and doubt, was now unbreakable. Eric vowed to protect Meredith, knowing the battle with Dwayne was just beginning. The morning was gray and brittle, a harsh wind whistling through the empty parking lot beside the Cedarbrook police station. The air was heavy with the promise of reckoning, a tension that hummed in the silence as Meredith, clutching a folder tight to her chest, stepped cautiously from Laney's idling car. She had barely closed the door behind her when Dwayne Prescott materialized at the far end of the lot, his broad figure blocking the path to the police entrance. 2 uniformed deputies flanked him, their faces blank and unreadable, eyes darting between the chief and the nervous woman before them. Meredith's every instinct told her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Ranger limped at her side, his head low, fur bristling with a wary determination. Dwayne's eyes fixed on her with a wolfish gleam. "You thought you could outsmart me, didn't you?" Dwayne's voice was sharp, low, and deadly. "Hand over the evidence, Meredith, now, or I promise this will end badly for you, and your mutt." She straightened her spine, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "This isn't your town anymore, Dwayne. People know the truth now. You can't hide behind a badge forever." One of the deputies shifted, uncertain. The other's jaw clenched, betraying a flicker of doubt. Dwayne took a menacing step forward. "You're going to hand over that card, and you're going to confess to fabricating every bit of it. Otherwise—" His hand drifted to his belt, hovering over his holster. Before Meredith could reply, a familiar car screeched to a halt at the edge of the lot. Eric Malloy burst from the driver's side, his voice ringing across the concrete. "Step away from her, Dwayne. It's over. The evidence is already with the state authorities. You can't stop this." Dwayne spun, fury distorting his features, and gestured sharply at the deputies. "Arrest her, and take the dog, now!" The 2 deputies hesitated, glancing at one another, then at Eric, who stood firm, one hand subtly raised to show he was unarmed, the other clutching his radio. "Don't do it," Eric said quietly. "You know what's right. You've seen the proof." Dwayne's face twisted, frustration giving way to desperation. In a sudden, violent movement, he lunged at Meredith, grabbing her by the arm. "You brought this on yourself!" he spat, trying to wrench the folder from her grip. The folder fell, scattering papers across the pavement. But Meredith refused to let go. The 2 struggled, the deputies frozen by indecision. It was Ranger who broke the stalemate. With a hoarse, guttural growl, he hurled his battered body between Meredith and Dwayne, jaws snapping perilously close to the chief's hand. Dwayne cursed and lashed out, but Ranger didn't flinch. He stood his ground, snarling, his body shielding Meredith with unwavering loyalty. Eric sprang forward, restraining Dwayne with practiced force, slapping handcuffs on his wrists even as the chief sputtered in rage. "You're under arrest, Dwayne Prescott," Eric declared, his voice cold and clear, "for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and the abduction of a minor." For a long moment, the lot was filled only with heavy breathing, the adrenaline pounding in everyone's veins. Meredith collapsed to her knees, gathering Ranger to her chest. Tears ran down her face, tears of terror, relief, and profound gratitude. "You saved me," she whispered, burying her face in Ranger's matted fur. "You always knew what was right." The deputies, at last shaken free from their paralysis, took Dwayne from Eric, escorting him roughly toward the station, their eyes lowered. Eric knelt beside Meredith, helping her to her feet, careful not to disturb Ranger, who now rested his head trustingly against her knee. Sirens blared in the distance, growing louder, announcing the arrival of state investigators. Eric squeezed Meredith's shoulder, offering a weary but hopeful smile. "It's over," he murmured. "You did it. Ranger did it. Cedarbrook owes you both." As the police cars rolled into the lot, Meredith stood, keeping a steady hand on Ranger's back. The weight of the ordeal pressed on her, but beneath it, a new strength stirred, a faith in the courage that one dog and one determined woman could muster together. The state investigation had officially begun. The interior of the state police station was colder than Meredith remembered any municipal building being, chilly not just in temperature, but in the air of stern, orderly justice. Sunlight slanted through barred windows, striping the walls and the pale blue carpet with gold and shadow. The stillness was punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock, counting out the seconds as the most pivotal moment of Meredith's life played out. She sat beside Eric at a long conference table, hands clasped tightly together. Across from them, a federal investigator in a trim suit methodically reviewed a thick folder, each page a fragment of truth reclaimed from the lies and darkness that had shrouded Cedarbrook. Ranger, ever loyal, lay at her feet, his side rising and falling in measured, reassuring breaths, a silent sentinel whose very presence lent her courage she hadn't known she still possessed. Dwayne Prescott sat further down the table, wrists cuffed, his once imposing demeanor shrunk to something pale and shrunken under the harsh lights. His eyes darted from the investigator to the dog, and finally, to Meredith herself, as if searching for a crack in the fortress of their story. The drama of the morning unfolded with all the efficiency and clarity that only the arrival of higher authorities could bring. The state police had gathered and authenticated every shred of evidence: the audio from Ranger's caller, the CCTV files, the written statements, the list of witnesses, and even medical records showing Aubrey's injuries were consistent with a rescue rather than an attack. The truth was, finally, inescapable. Dwayne Prescott had orchestrated a cover-up, abused his power, and, when exposed, tried to shift the blame onto the innocent, onto Meredith, and most of all, onto a dog whose only crime had been loyalty beyond human measure. "Mr. Prescott," the investigator said, voice crisp and cool, "you are hereby under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, conspiracy to conceal evidence, and endangering the life of a minor. You will be remanded to state custody pending trial. Do you understand these charges?" Dwayne, broken now, could only nod, his gaze dropping to the polished tabletop as two uniformed officers stepped forward, leading him out of the room. The moment the door shut behind them, the entire atmosphere changed. A wave of relief, catharsis, and disbelief swept over Meredith. Eric exhaled long and slow, pinching the bridge of his nose, unable to keep the tremor of pride from his voice when he said, "You did it, Meredith. You and Ranger." Word spread like wildfire. Within an hour, the lobby of the police station was alive with voices. Reporters from local and national news outlets, people from Cedarbrook holding signs, even a few children with hand-drawn pictures of Ranger. Someone had started a hashtag. Ranger the Hero trended across social media, and by noon, the entire nation seemed to know the story of the dog who had endured abuse, suspicion, and cruelty, only to rise and save a life, and a town's conscience, in the end. A press conference was called in the main briefing room. Cameras and microphones angled in on Meredith as she sat in a straight-backed chair, Ranger pressed close to her side. Eric stood behind her, a quiet but unwavering ally. When the lead journalist, a woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of gentle, probing voice only years in the field could refine, leaned forward and posed her question, Meredith felt the entire weight of her journey, her mistakes, her redemption, settled gently across her shoulders. "Mrs. Sloan," the journalist asked, "in light of everything that's happened, what would you say to the people who, like you once did, turned away from those who need help the most? What would you tell someone who hesitates to show kindness, to give a second chance?" The room hushed. Outside, the low hum of traffic and the distant call of birds filtered through the walls. Meredith looked down at Ranger, his amber eyes gazing up at her with infinite trust, as if urging her to speak not just for herself, but for every misunderstood soul that ever waited on a doorstep. She smiled, voice trembling but clear. "I'd tell them that sometimes opening your door is the bravest thing you can do. That giving someone, or something, a second chance might not just change their life, it might just save yours too. We all carry scars, but it's what we do with our pain that defines us. Ranger reminded me that loyalty and love don't always come in the ways you expect, but when they do, you have to be willing to see them, to welcome them in. So, give that chance. You never know whose life you might save, or who might save yours. Cameras flashed. The words, so simple and so true, seemed to hang in the air long after she finished speaking, carried out of that room and into the world by a dozen microphones and 1,000 hearts. As the press conference dissolved into applause and shouts of "Bravo!" Meredith bent and pressed her forehead gently against Ranger's. "Thank you," she whispered, overcome with gratitude and humility. "You showed me what courage means." Eric placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing with quiet pride. "Cedarbrook's never going to forget this, Meredith. Neither will the country." From that moment, the legend of Ranger and Meredith Sloan grew, carried on news networks, in school classrooms, through social media feeds, and in the stories parents told their children at night. News of Meredith and Ranger's story spread across the nation. The walls of the Cedarbrook Animal Hospital glowed a soft, hopeful yellow as dawn crept gently through the blinds. The night's drama had ebbed, leaving behind a quiet in which every breath, every movement seemed magnified with meaning. Meredith sat beside Ranger's recovery bed, her hand resting lightly on the faded fur of his paw, the weight of the past weeks finally settling into a bitter-sweet, aching gratitude. There was something about this morning that felt different, lighter, though no less charged with emotion. Lainey hovered nearby, checking monitors and gently adjusting Ranger's IV, her face drawn with fatigue and relief in equal measure. "He's a tough one," she said, voice roughened by a long night, but smiling all the same. "I haven't seen a spirit like his in years." Ranger, eyes still glazed from anesthesia, blinked up at Meredith, recognition flickering in those warm, amber depths. His breathing was shallow but steady, and for the first time in days, his tail thumped. Tentative, weak, but alive with hope. The door opened softly, and in stepped Aubrey, clutching a piece of crumpled construction paper to her chest. Her mother trailed behind, her arm protectively wrapped around the little girl's shoulders. Aubrey's face was pale but radiant, her hair swept back in messy curls, her eyes wide with a trust that only the young and those who have known true rescue can carry. "I made this for Ranger," Aubrey whispered, holding out the drawing with trembling hands. The picture showed a large brown dog, cape fluttering behind him, standing guard over a stick-figure child. In bright, uneven letters she had scrawled, "Hero Dog," across the top. Meredith felt tears prick her eyes, her throat tightening around words she couldn't find. Instead, she watched as Aubrey set the drawing at the foot of the bed, brushing her small hand against Ranger's flank. "Thank you for saving me," the child murmured, voice quivering with sincerity. "You're my hero." Lainey turned away, pretending to be busy with medical charts, but Meredith saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes. Aubrey's mother knelt by the bedside, taking Meredith's hand in hers, a silent gesture of gratitude, forgiveness, and understanding. The room was quiet, save for the steady beeping of the monitor and the gentle, comforting hum of life moving forward. Meredith bent closer to Ranger, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry," she said, each word heavy with remorse and resolution. "I was wrong to turn you away. I promise you, I'll never abandon another soul who needs help. Not you, not anyone, ever again." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, with effort and intention, Ranger lifted his paw and placed it gently on top of Meredith's hand. His touch was warm, deliberate, almost impossibly gentle. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, the wounds of mistrust and loneliness began to heal. Not just for Meredith, but for everyone in the room. The moment swelled with emotion. Too raw and genuine to name. Lainey let out a shaky sigh, and even Aubrey's mother dabbed her eyes. The hospital room, so recently a place of fear and desperation, became a sanctuary, a small, sunlit space where forgiveness and love triumphed over regret. As the morning light brightened, Meredith sat taller, a new resolve crystallizing within her. Ranger, watching her with that knowing gaze, seemed to understand. The journey that had begun with suspicion and fear was not over. In fact, something even greater lay ahead. Meredith made up her mind to do something special for the community. Sunlight spilled across Cedarbrook's Central Park, warming the faces of neighbors gathered in a circle around the little makeshift stage. Balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, blue and gold streamers fluttered from the railings, and picnic tables brimmed with potluck casseroles and homemade lemonade. After all the turmoil, fear, and doubt that had shadowed the town, this day felt almost miraculous, a public celebration that seemed to wash away the stains of suspicion with the simple joy of community. At the center of it all stood Ranger, still bandaged, but walking on his own, a shimmer of strength and pride animating every step. Meredith walked beside him, her arm gently guiding his big head toward the crowd, her eyes shining with the sort of fierce gratitude only hard-won redemption can bring. Eric and Lainey, not far behind, wore broad, unguarded smiles, each acutely aware of how close they'd come to losing both their town's peace and its newest four-legged hero. The mayor, a tall woman with a kind, weathered face, called the assembly to order, her voice echoing across the sun-dappled grass. "We are here to honor courage, not just the kind found in uniform or badge, but the courage to listen, to trust, and to forgive. Cedarbrook owes a debt to this remarkable dog, who saved not only a child's life, but perhaps a piece of all our hearts." She bent down, and with a flourish that brought cheers and applause, fastened a shining silver badge to Ranger's battered collar. The inscription read, "Cedarbrook Hero, Ranger." For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath as everyone watched Ranger's reaction. He stood, regal and composed, then wagged his tail, a small, dignified gesture that seemed to radiate through the crowd. Aubrey, her hair in neat braids and her dress as bright as a spring morning, clutched a note card and stepped nervously to the microphone. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied, clear and sure. "Thank you, Ranger, for saving me when I was lost, for not giving up even when grown-ups didn't believe you, and for teaching me that hope is real. You're not just a hero. You're my friend." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Meredith wiped tears from her cheeks, aware she wasn't the only one. Even the usually stoic Eric had to look away, his eyes shining suspiciously. Yet not every face reflected joy or relief. Near the back, a small knot of townsfolk clustered together, arms folded and brows furrowed, murmuring among themselves about old dogs and second chances. Their doubts lingered in the air, subtle but sharp, a reminder that forgiveness and trust never come easily for everyone. One woman, a familiar critic from Meredith's block, whispered loud enough for others to hear, "A hero today, but what about tomorrow? You know how these strays are?" If Ranger heard her, he gave no sign. His attention was suddenly drawn by movement near the park's edge. There, just outside the fence, a tiny, scruffy puppy cowered behind a trash can as a teenager tried to shoo it away with angry gestures. The pup whimpered, tail tucked, glancing hopefully toward the noise and celebration inside the park. Ranger's ears perked, and with a bark that was half command, half invitation, he trotted over as quickly as his healing legs would allow. The crowd's laughter and chatter faltered, eyes turning as the dog who had just been lauded as a town savior now paced toward the fence, nose pressed against the chain links. Meredith watched, heart clenching with a sudden, sharp understanding. She remembered all too well the feeling of being lost, misunderstood, and alone. The same feeling she'd seen in Ranger's eyes that very first night on her porch. Without a second's hesitation, she made her way through the throng, weaving past outstretched hands and congratulations until she reached the edge of the park. The teenager backed away, embarrassed. "It's just a stray, ma'am. Don't want it making trouble." Meredith knelt, her hand outstretched, voice gentle but unwavering. "No one here is just a stray." The little dog crept forward, trembling, and Meredith scooped it up, holding the puppy close as it shivered against her chest. Across the fence, Ranger gave a short, approving bark, his tail wagging as if to say, "Yes, this is how it starts again. One act of kindness, one life at a time." The crowd watched in silence, the doubters momentarily hushed, as Meredith cradled the puppy in her arms and Ranger settled at her side. In that simple tableau, the day's celebration found its true meaning, not just in honoring a hero, but in recognizing the chance to become one, over and over through acts of mercy and compassion. Meredith stepped forward, cradling the tiny dog in her arms. As the late afternoon sun stretched golden rays through the lace curtains of Meredith's living room, the house felt changed, brighter, more alive, as though every shadow had been gently chased away. Ranger sprawled contentedly on his favorite rug by the fireplace, his injured leg wrapped but healing, his gaze following Meredith as she bustled around with an energy that hadn't been present in years. And nestled in her lap, eyes wide and trusting, was the newest member of their unlikely family, a scrappy, spotted puppy with one brown ear and a crooked little smile. Meredith had named him Patch. It didn't take long for Patch to make himself at home. He sniffed every corner, tumbled awkwardly across the polished wood floors, and trailed after Ranger with comical devotion. Every so often, Ranger would pause, casting a tolerant look back at the clumsy pup, his tail thumping the floor in resigned amusement. Meredith watched them both with a tenderness that surprised her. It had been years since she'd let herself feel such uncomplicated joy. She took photos of Ranger and Patch curled up together and with trembling hands posted them to her modest social media account. In her caption, Meredith wrote simply, "They say you don't choose your family. Sometimes your family chooses you. Welcome home, Patch. Thank you, Ranger." She didn't expect much. A few likes from distant relatives, perhaps a handful of comments from old friends. But within hours, the post exploded. People from all corners of Cedarbrook, and soon beyond, shared their own stories of rescue, redemption, and unlikely companionship. The post gathered thousands of shares, dozens of heartfelt messages, and before the evening was over, Meredith's inbox overflowed with offers of help and gratitude. The flurry of attention startled Meredith, but it was a knock at the door that truly surprised her. She opened it to find Keith Benson, her next-door neighbor, standing awkwardly on the porch. For years, Keith had been a constant source of grumbling, muttering about barking dogs, untidy lawns, and the mess these strays leave behind. He looked sheepish now, a casserole dish in his hands, and shifted from foot to foot before clearing his throat. "Meredith," he began, his voice tight. I saw the pictures, and the story. I guess I never really understood how much these dogs mean to you, or what you've been through lately. I'm sorry for how I acted. Really. I'd like to help if you'd let me." He handed her the casserole, then glanced inside at Ranger and Patch, his face softening in genuine remorse. "If you're thinking about, maybe, building something for the dogs around here, I'm pretty handy with a hammer. Just say the word." Meredith was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, her mind flashed back to the angry phone calls and curt complaints that had once driven a wedge between their homes. Now, the barrier seemed almost laughably small compared to what they'd all endured. She smiled, her heart swelling, and nodded. "Thank you, Keith. I'd like that very much." That night, as Patch drifted into sleep beside Ranger, and the quiet hush of evening settled over the house, Meredith sat at her old desk with a notebook and pen. The messages and outpouring of support online still played through her mind. So many voices, so many needs, all yearning for a second chance. She felt a spark of resolve flicker in her chest. Why stop at just this house? Why not reach further, make something lasting out of everything they'd survived? She drew up the first outlines of what she would later call the Ranger Fund, a grassroots project to provide food, shelter, and veterinary care for abandoned dogs and at-risk children across Cedarbrook. The idea grew quickly, fueled by memory and hope. A network of volunteers, an education campaign, maybe even a small adoption fair in the park. The more she planned, the more the sorrow and regret that had haunted her seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet purpose. When she finished, Meredith leaned back in her chair and gazed at the sleeping dogs, one scarred and seasoned by hardship, the other just beginning his journey. She thought of all the lost souls she'd once turned away, all the kindness she'd withheld out of fear. Not anymore. Within days, emails from donors and local businesses began pouring in. Cedarbrook's community center had never felt so alive. The once muted gymnasium now brimmed with laughter and hopeful chatter, the sharp aroma of fresh paint and sawdust lingering in the air as volunteers hammered together new kennels, strung up banners, and filled tables with pamphlets bearing the bright blue emblem of the Ranger Fund. Meredith stood at the entrance, her heart nearly bursting as she watched Eric and Lainey coordinate a gaggle of eager children, each paired with a shelter dog for the day's Rescue Readiness Workshop. Patch, ever the bundle of energy, darted between legs and chairs, delighting the youngest attendees with his clumsy puppy antics, while Ranger moved with quiet assurance among the crowd, every wag of his tail a gentle invitation to trust. The air buzzed with the promise of something new, a chance to mend wounds and build bridges, not only between people, but between hearts that had once been closed off by pain or suspicion. Meredith moved through the center, stopping to greet neighbors and strangers alike. Keith Benson, now a regular volunteer, joked easily with Laney as they filled bowls for the dogs. Even the mayor showed up, offering an encouraging handshake and a promise to match the fund's next round of donations. Cedarbrook, a town that once eyed strays and outsiders with suspicion, now seemed transformed, if only by the simple truth that everyone needed someone to believe in them. In the corner, a small drama unfolded that Meredith would never forget. Noah, a shy boy from the local foster home, stood clutching a worn blanket, his big brown eyes red-rimmed with tears. Patch had crawled into his lap uninvited, licking away the tracks of sorrow as the boy sobbed silently. Meredith knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked softly, her voice steady with the wisdom of someone who had known loss and found redemption on the other side. Noah nodded, and so Meredith began, speaking not only to him, but to everyone within earshot, about the dirty dog no one wanted, about mistakes and second chances, about how real courage often meant opening your heart even when it hurt. Her words drifted above the noise, weaving through the room like sunlight after a long storm. As she spoke, Ranger rose and padded over, pressing his nose into Noah's small hand, his deep, unwavering gaze conveying a promise beyond language. "You are not alone." The effect was immediate. Noah's sobs quieted, his grip loosening as Patch curled tighter against his side. The room stilled, drawn by the sight of the battle-scarred shepherd, once rejected, now a symbol of healing, lying protectively at the feet of a broken boy. For a fleeting moment, every soul in the building felt it, the bridge between old hurts and new hope, the bond forged not by blood, but by kindness and the willingness to forgive. As the afternoon waned and the last of the workshops gave way to pizza, lemonade, and games in the parking lot, Meredith realized something profound had changed within her and throughout Cedarbrook. The Ranger Fund was more than a project. It was a lifeline, for the dogs, for the children, for herself. Together they were building something that would last beyond scars, beyond prejudice, beyond grief. Plans for the first ever Hero Dog Day were already being drafted on the whiteboard by the exit, complete with parades, speeches, and a promise to honor every animal who had ever given a lonely soul a reason to hope. The town was ready for something beautiful. Cedarbrook Park, usually a haven of quiet shade and distant laughter, had transformed into a place alive with purpose, color, and music. Tents lined the walking paths, each adorned with bright banners declaring messages of hope, compassion, and the new mission at the heart of the community, that every dog and every child deserved a champion. The sun shone kindly, dappling the crowds with golden light as hundreds gathered for the first ever Hero Dog Day, eager to witness the celebration of courage, healing, and unity that had changed the soul of their town. Meredith stood near the main stage, her heart full as she watched Ranger navigate the throng of admirers with gentle dignity. Patch, ever the playful sidekick, bounded beside Noah, their friendship as unshakable as any she had ever seen. Children ran with rescue dogs through obstacle courses, while older residents gathered to share coffee and memories, their laughter rising above the joyful chaos. Eric and Laney directed volunteers with the easy camaraderie of people who knew they were building something that would outlast them. As the afternoon unfolded, the crowd gathered for the much-anticipated rescue dog competition. Ranger, his scars visible beneath his new bandana, was met with applause and tears as he demonstrated skills honed from a life of service, locating a hidden, lost child in seconds, responding to Noah's gentle commands with unwavering loyalty. Patch, with less experience but boundless enthusiasm, tried his best at each challenge, earning cheers and affectionate laughter when he tumbled, picked himself up, and tried again. Every moment seemed to reinforce what the town had come to believe, that the worth of a life, dog or human, was measured in heart, not perfection. The auction followed, raising money for children like Noah, and for the care of animals who might otherwise be forgotten. The bids soared, the community's generosity as boundless as the blue sky overhead. Yet beneath the celebration, a quiet tension threaded through the day. A family from a neighboring town, touched by Patch's story, approached Meredith with a heartfelt request to adopt him, promising a loving home and every comfort a dog could want. Meredith's face softened as she knelt to Patch's level, but when she saw Noah's eyes, wide, brimming with fear and silent pleading, she realized that this dog had already found his place. In a voice that trembled with conviction, she said, "Patch is already part of a family. Ours." The family understood, smiling graciously, and instead pledged a donation to the Ranger Fund, grateful to be a part of the day. As the golden light of dusk settled over the park, the community gathered one last time at the stage. Ranger, Patch, and Noah stood together, Noah holding Patch's leash with one hand and Ranger's collar with the other. Meredith, Eric, Laney, and the whole crowd watched as the mayor presented the trio with a special Heroes Medal, the applause rolling over them like a gentle wave. The image of these three, boy, old dog, and puppy, holding onto each other in front of hundreds became the symbol of a movement that was no longer just about rescue, but about belonging, forgiveness, and hope. The festival ended with fireworks and music, families lingering long after sunset, unwilling to let go of a day that had healed so much. News crews from across the state filmed the celebration, capturing every heartfelt moment. By midnight, photos of Ranger, Patch, and Noah standing on stage, their hands and paws entwined, had gone viral, becoming a beacon for anyone who had ever wondered if a single act of kindness could change the world. The story was no longer just Cedar Brook's. As summer gave way to autumn, the story of Ranger and the Cedar Brook miracle reverberated far beyond the town's familiar streets. Local papers were the first to run with it: a widow, a lost dog, and a child saved against all odds. But it didn't take long before regional news anchors picked up the thread, their voices trembling with awe as they recounted how one battered German shepherd had changed an entire community. Within weeks, the internet caught fire. Videos of Ranger at the festival, photos of Noah hugging Patch, and clips of Meredith speaking with raw conviction at the town hall became viral, each view adding to a wave of hope that swept across the country. At first, Meredith was bewildered by the flood of attention. Her mailbox overflowed with letters, cards, and crayon drawings from children in towns she'd never heard of. "Dear Mrs. Sloan," one letter began, its shaky scrawl barely fitting on the lines. "If not for dogs like Ranger, I'd never believe grown-ups could be good again." She read that one aloud, voice faltering, and Ranger pressed closer, his nose buried in her lap as if he could sense the ache and the gratitude mingling inside her. Reporters arrived from Chicago, Dallas, and even as far as Portland, hoping to glimpse the famous dog and the woman who had given him a second chance. Meredith greeted them all with humility, her eyes bright behind silver-framed glasses as she repeated what had become her refrain. "I didn't save Ranger. Ranger saved us all." When Patch, now a sturdy, boisterous presence in the house, barked his agreement, the journalists laughed, the sound echoing the warmth that now filled the once quiet home. But it wasn't just attention that arrived. Donations poured into the Ranger Fund from every corner of the map. Shelters across the Midwest wrote to say they'd launched new foster programs, inspired by Cedar Brook's example. Social workers in Oregon and Florida contacted Meredith for guidance, hoping to pair therapy dogs with children struggling to trust again. In Ohio, a group of teenagers organized their own Day of Hope, raising enough money to build a playground for kids and rescue animals to share. The impact was deeply personal, too. A single mother from Nebraska emailed a picture of her daughter, standing proudly with their newly adopted senior dog. She said if Ranger could be a hero, so could Henry. An Army veteran from Georgia called the Ranger Fund hotline, his voice rough with emotion as he thanked them for restoring his faith in people and in old dogs. With every message, every story, the invisible web of kindness that had started on Meredith's front porch seemed to stretch farther, binding strangers together in a shared belief that even the smallest gesture mattered. And yet, amid the outpouring of joy, there were moments of painful honesty. One night, sifting through emails, Meredith found a message from a girl named Sophie in Detroit. The note was short, typed in careful lowercase. "I didn't think anyone cared about kids like me, but if a dog could make people listen, maybe there's hope for me too." Tears slipped down Meredith's cheeks as she read, her hands trembling as she reached for Ranger. Pulling him close, she pressed her cheek to his fur, whispering gratitude for the chain reaction he'd set in motion, all beginning with a single, desperate glance at her door. Even Keith Benson, once the most cynical of neighbors, sent a message for the website. "You showed us what we could be. Cedarbrook will never be the same." As Ranger's story traveled, the Ranger Fund became a movement. Hundreds of microgrants helping to reunite lost children and dogs, support adoptions for seniors, and seed community rescue efforts nationwide. Meredith was invited to speak at conferences, zoom into classrooms, and consult with lawmakers. She never forgot the weight of that first choice. To open the door or not. Now, every morning, as Ranger and Patch played at her feet and sunlight danced across her kitchen floor, she reminded herself and the world that courage came not from grand gestures, but from small acts of faith and mercy. The transformation was not just in the news or in the lives touched from afar. Cedarbrook itself had changed, forever marked by the lesson that the boundaries between us and them, human and animal, insider and outsider, could dissolve if only someone was brave enough to look, to listen, and to act with compassion. 1 year later, Cedarbrook was not the same town it had been. The sun hung low over Cedarbrook, casting soft, golden light across Meredith's porch, where the old wooden boards now bore the scuffs and scratches of a year's worth of laughter, paw prints, and new beginnings. It was exactly 1 year since Ranger had first appeared, battered and desperate, at Meredith Sloane's door, and as tradition now dictated, she and Noah prepared a small table with lemonade, fresh bread, and slices of apple pie, an offering to neighbors, friends, and anyone who wanted to celebrate the town's Day of Miracles. People drifted in, each carrying a story. Some brought flowers, others carried memories of loss and healing. Lainey arrived with her arms full of dog treats and a warm embrace for Meredith, while Eric brought his wife and baby daughter, who gurgled and kicked at the sight of Patch chasing a butterfly in the yard. Noah, his eyes brighter than ever, had drawn a huge banner that read, "Thank you, Ranger," and hung it from the porch railings. For every person, there was a story. A neighbor who'd found purpose volunteering at the rescue, a shy teenager who'd overcome loneliness by caring for a foster puppy, a widower who'd dared to adopt after years of solitude. Each tale was a thread in the tapestry that Ranger's arrival had woven. Laughter rippled through the gathering as Keith Benson approached, this time not as a skeptic, but as a doting grandfather, holding his curly-haired granddaughter by one hand and a squirming, muddy little puppy by the other. "Meredith, looks like we've got another lost soul needing your magic," he teased, placing the puppy gently at her feet. Meredith knelt, feeling the puppy's frantic heartbeat through its tiny frame, and she smiled, grateful for a community that now understood that every second chance given could be the start of something extraordinary. Ranger stretched out in a sunbeam, his fur gone a little grayer, but his eyes still alive with that unmistakable spark, the knowing, loyal gaze of a soul who'd weathered hardship and found a family. Patch tumbled after the new arrival, their joyful barks echoing around the porch, while children chased after them, shrieking with delight. The air was thick with stories, of gratitude, of forgiveness, of the tiny miracles that unfolded when anyone, decided to say yes instead of looking away. As dusk settled, Meredith sat quietly beside Ranger, watching the others celebrate. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, and said, "Every chance we give can change someone's whole world." The words felt sacred, lessons learned not from books or sermons, but from the silent, persistent hope of a dog left on a doorstep. Ranger blinked, his gaze soft, as if understanding every word. The last rays of sunlight bathed the porch in gold, and Meredith knew that what they had begun, on a night so uncertain, so heavy with fear, had truly come full circle. Ranger's eyes shone with trust, and as the sun dipped behind Cedarbrook's rooftops, a new chapter of hope quietly began. And so, from a single act of compassion on a quiet porch, an entire community was transformed, reminding us all that sometimes the greatest heroes arrive with muddy paws and hopeful eyes. Ranger's journey proves that giving just one chance can change countless lives for both people and the animals who wait for us to open our doors. Have you ever given a second chance to a stray animal or someone in need? Share your story with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear how a simple act of kindness made a difference in your life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales about the unbreakable bond between humans and their loyal companions. Your support helps us spread hope, one story at a time.